Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my part 2 of my top 20 players at Worlds 2022 video here today. Obviously, yesterday we posted our part 1, which was covering numbers 20 through 11. If you want to check out that video, if you haven't seen it yet, obviously I highly recommend you check that one out, as a lot of the placements on this list make a lot more sense when you think about the people who have already been placed on the list. You can see that up in the iCard right now. You can go check that video out, and again, I recommend you do so. But if you're coming from that video, welcome. It is time to go over numbers 10 to 1. Part 1 was already controversial enough. This one is only going to increase in controversy because I'm sure I'm going to both start and end this video with some very, very hot takes that you all are probably not going to agree with, but hopefully you'll be able to listen to my thoughts and at least hear me out on some of my opinions. If you guys are ready for this video, let me know down in the comments section below. Obviously, these videos are very, very divisive, and I love having conversations with everybody in the comment section about my thoughts. I've already started doing that. I left a pinned comment on the video yesterday, kind of explaining my thoughts a little bit more in depth. But I love having those specific conversations with you guys, so if you have any major disagreements, and I'm absolutely sure with this one that you will, leave them in the comments section below, and I'm happy to have that conversation. But without further ado, it is time to jump right into the video. Yesterday we had the honorable mentions. This time we're just jumping straight into our top 10. And kicking off our top 10, a pick, like I said, we're going to start off the video with something that is incredibly divisive, and I can already feel the hate comments coming through. But if you've been following the channel, you'll know that I think a little bit lower of this player than the general consensus right now. Coming in at number 10, and as the number 3 jungler in the world for me, it is going to be Tian from Top Esports, the LPL MVP of the season. And this is a pretty bold claim to take because, yes, he did just win the MVP of the best region in the world, and that's a pretty big thing to have on your resume going into a World Championships. To come in at number 10 in the rankings from that seems pretty ludicrous. But those who have been following the channel for any extended period of time will know that I don't see him as the best player on his team. We will get to that later in this video, but we had Love closing out the last video. We have a top esports player in Tian beginning this one. Let's explain why I'm a little bit lower, and also why Tian deserves to be in the top 10. Not that I think that will need explaining. For me, I just don't know if he had the same kind of game-breaking impact that some other, well, mostly other top tier junglers in this year had. Mostly talking about the 2 junglers we're going to see higher on this list, who you can probably guess. That's why, for me, that he came in as all-pro second team in the LPL. I didn't even have him in my top 5 for MVP voting. He came in at number 6 for me. And so, overall, I don't know. Maybe I just am not seeing it, but Tian was very good this year. He was a top 10 player in the world, caliber player. He was dominant. He really expedited the game for Top Esports. His early game aggression was good. He was able to set up a lot for his lanes, but he really wasn't the one capitalizing on a lot of the aggression he was able to create. He left a lot of that up to the rest of his team, and while it's still incredibly valuable to have a player like Tian on your team, still, without a doubt, a top 10, 15 player in the world, having him means you're going to be one of the best teams in the world no matter what. I do think he probably looks a little bit more complete as a jungler and as a player because his lanes have been so good over the course of the year. You have that bot lane that we've already talked about a considerable amount, playing so aggressive. You have someone in the top lane like Wayward, who was generally just able to beat up on a lot of the other LPL top laners this year. And then you have a mid laner who we're going to talk about later in this video. That's not to take away from how good Tian is, but it really felt like his job was made a lot easier because of the team that was around him. I don't want to take away from the accomplishment that he had this year, and quite frankly, the narrative around Tian is phenomenal. The bounce back here after all the wrist issues that he's had after the really disappointing World Championship he had last year on FPX. It's really good to see him bounce back here in 2022, be one of the best junglers in the world, and reclaim that spot in the top 10. I just have a little bit more of a difficult time placing him above 10 than a lot of other people will. Now, I've seen him pretty regularly come in around 4 or 5 on a lot of other people's lists, maybe potentially even higher. For me, the only thing keeping him out is I just need to see him be the main carry on this team more often. That's really what it is he's not that role on top esports, and that's not a problem. That's not always a bad thing, but really, I reserve a lot of the top 6, top 7 people on this list for players that who are generally the main carry on their team every single game. There are a lot of really, really talented players, either that or the ones that are genuinely just taking victory no matter what happens. We'll see that later, but Tian unfortunately just falls a little bit, just a tad bit outside of that. So I know I'm going to make a lot of people angry with Tian here overall. Again, 13 Player of the Game awards in the LPL. I only had him as 2 Player of the Series here. Again, a lot of that is just because Top Esports is super loaded, and there's a reason they're one of the best teams in the world, but still, I think Tian's activity on this Top Esports team maybe gets a little bit overhyped in the grand scheme of things, not to the point where I think he's a bad player or not, like, one of the best players in the world. Like, I don't want my words to get twisted out of context here. I think Tian is one of the best players in the world. Top 10 in the world is a very, very high mark. I just don't know if I can put him higher than some of the people that are going to be above him on this list, but I really do hope he proves me wrong. Obviously, he got probably the easiest group draw he could have gotten. Group C is pretty open and pretty free, and so Tian's going to have ample opportunity to prove that he is one of, if not the best jungler in the world at this World Championships, but I think we're really going to have to wait until knockout stage, until the best of 5s for us to really get into that conversation with Tian. Not sure that's going to be happening in group stage, but definitely an opportunity for him to come out and perform like the best jungler in the world, and if he can do that, you know, obviously, I'd love to see it. Me putting him at 10 is not an indictment of me not wanting him to do well. It's more of, I just need to see it on the world stage. I need to see him be the one with all the resources that carries the games, and then I'm going to feel a lot more confident about Tian being closer to top 5. Well, now that we've got number 10 out of the way, certainly definitely going to spark some comments with that one, starting the video off with. Then we get to move on to number 9, and it's a player who I think greatly increased their stock throughout the year from what they were in previous years. You can probably already tell who it is by my description, but coming in at number 9 in my top 20, and as my number 4 mid laner, I have Yagao from JD Gaming, and there really is a case to be made that he could be even higher than this, closer to top 5. And I really wouldn't be all that appalled by that decision. He was really phenomenal for JDG throughout the year. A big reason why that team was so consistent throughout the year was Yagao's ability to take any matchup and make it positive for JDG. Obviously, he's not the only player on this team that I think is dominant. We've already seen 2 JDG players in the top 20 list here, with 369 and with Missing. Yagao comes in here as the 3rd, and spoiler alert, we're going to see a 4th later in this video, but Yagao was a huge reason why this team was so successful all year long, and I think the best way that I can describe that, like in a small sentence here, would just be, this is the perfect meta for a player like Yagao, a player who is much more supportive in nature, a player who doesn't really need to be the focal point of a lot of the resources in order to be super effective for his team. He's always been much better as a secondary damage threat, a secondary carry. That's what he was in 2020 for this JDG team. That's very much what he is again here in 2022, except that role is significantly more popular. You're looking at the mid lane meta. I talked about this in my meta review. You're looking at a lot of Talia. You're looking at a lot of Ahri. You're looking at a lot of Sylas. Things that aren't really designed to be the number 1 carry on the team. This isn't an Azir meta or anything like that, but things that can be super mobile, things that can help their jungler out, can secure objectives, and have a much higher emphasis placed on macro decisions rather than micro decision-making and laning ability. And I think that really plays into the strengths of Yagao overall, and we're going into Worlds with that exact same meta, and so overall I think Yagao is going to perform phenomenally at this World Championships. I expect him to continue to be one of the more underrated players in the world in terms of the grand scheme of things. I think people are starting to catch up to how good Yagao has been over the course of the year. He does seem to be getting treated rather well in these top 20 lists, and I'm happy to see that. He comes in at number 9 for me. He has the potential to be much higher here, especially because of the team that he's on. He's often given a lot of opportunity to show how well he does in this meta in particular, with players like Kanavi in the jungle, with a bot lane like Hope and Missing that are going to be a little bit more passive and wait for direction. I think Yagao is often given a lot more priority in this team structure, and I think it definitely plays to his strengths overall. You'll see he came in 3rd on my All-Pro team. He came in 3rd in my MVP voting as well. The top 3 mid laners were my top 3 players in the LPL LPL this year, so just because he came in third doesn't mean that I think he's a bad player by any stretch of the imagination, but 9 Player of the Game awards, the LPL, 5 Player of the Series awards for me, that is a lot. I know context is a little bit difficult there. I talked about that with the beginning video, the part 1 that came out yesterday, where Player of the Games are obviously always going to be higher than Player of the Series because they play best of 3s in the regular season. I only give 1 per best of 3, and they give multiple per best of 3, so overall, it definitely is a little bit skewed, but 5 is quite a bit of player of the series. I believe he comes in first on his team in terms of player of the series, and I think you can make a real case that he was probably the most influential in their regular season run, and I think he has the ability to do that again in the World Championships. Again, another player out of Group B. We've had so many players in Group B on this list already. I definitely think that's going to matter. Group B is going to be an absolute disaster for somebody. I don't know who it is yet, but I have a pretty high feeling that it's not going to be JDG, and a lot of that is just the consistency that Yagao has offered. So, could I see him being a top 4, top 5 player at this World Championships? Absolutely. It wouldn't even really be that surprising to me. But for now, I just want to give a lot of recognition to some of the players that are above him on this list. So he, unfortunately, for me, comes in at number 9, but an incredibly talented player. And at this point, anybody who comes in at the top 10 is one of the best players in the world. Moving on to number 8 on the list. Like I said before, every player from here on out is a top-tier player in the world, and that is embodied by my number 1 support in the world coming in here at number 8, and that is going to be Ming from RNG. Now, people will know on this channel that I'm a little bit lower on RNG than maybe a lot of the other analysts out there. I have them at number 7 in my power rankings, and a lot of people see that as pretty low, but it certainly isn't because of the talent level on this team. I certainly can understand why a lot of people think they should be better, and Ming is a big reason for that. In my opinion, he is the best support in the world right now, and I don't really think it's all that contestable, at least in my mind. Obviously, a lot of people really like Lehens, but like I talked about in the previous video, I'm not sure if Lehens would do nearly as well in other situations as he is doing right now on Gen G. But I digress. This isn't about Lehens. This is about Ming being my number 1 support in the world. I've been calling him that since the middle of the year. His spring was genuinely unbelievable. I voted for him for MVP in spring. He was that good for an RNG team that really dominated in playoffs, and he really showed up at MSI. He was awesome at that tournament. Was a big reason RNG was able to capture the prize at MSI. Comes back in summer in a meta that is drastically different. We start going from these engagers that we saw in spring, things like the Leona, things like the Nautilus, into the more enchanter-oriented meta, but Ming said, no, I'm still going to play engagers, and I'm still going to be better than everybody else in the LPL on them, and it worked for a majority of the year. Unfortunately, it just really isn't the meta for that right now, but Ming certainly has proven that it doesn't really matter whether it's in or out of meta. He's still going to be able to perform at the highest possible level because his skill level is just simply that high. He's one of the few supports in the world that I genuinely do believe the team plays almost entirely around, and you can see that in a lot of the plays they make in the early game. Wei, unfortunately, is not going to make this list from RNG. I think a lot of the things that Wei does well, he does because he has the pressure of Ming in his back pocket. Wei often likes to play towards the bottom side of the map, towards the early part of the game, trying to secure those objectives, often counter-jungling, and I think it's because Ming is so willing to, no offense to Gala, abandon the lane in order to help out the macro plays, because they really don't like to push that bot lane advantage too much. Ming is very proactive on the map, often helping out Xiaohu in the mid lane, helping out Wei in the jungle, and can create a ton of disadvantages for the enemy team, some macro advantages for their team, numbers advantages, whatever you want to call them, across the map in order to help secure vision, help secure objectives, hell, even just counter jungle in an easy way. Overall, Ming just offers so much to RNG that really unlocks the rest of their playstyle that I'm honestly not sure if the team would function nearly as well without him on it, because he's such a core piece to what this team wants to do. Now, that's not to say he doesn't have weaknesses, because he absolutely does have some weaknesses. Like I said, he is kind of a little bit of a one-trick pony in terms of his playstyle. That's not to say he's an awful enchanter player by any means. He's a good enchanter player, but he's probably not a top 10 player in the world on enchanters, and that's something that I think differs from a player like Missing or a player like Keria that we talked about earlier on this list. I think they're significantly more versatile in picking up some of the other enchanters, the less aggressive supports Ming just doesn't have that. He's definitely someone who prefers to play those engagers, prefers to play all in, very aggressive, and I doubt that we're going to see a big change of that at Worlds. If my meta report is accurate, we're still going to be seeing a lot of enchanters on the world stage, but I do think that there is an avenue for engagers to still be prevalent. I still have Nautilus as a pick that is in my tier 1 of supports. I still think things like Tahm Kench, like a Mumu, can be super viable in the meta if they're played correctly. So Ming's not completely dead in the water because of the meta, but obviously if you have a flaw with him, it's that I wish he could pick up the Lulu and be just as efficient as he is on the Nautilus, but it's really hard to complain when he plays the Nautilus so ridiculously well at an MVP caliber level in the LPL. He was first team All-Pro for me at support. He had 4 player of the series for me for RNG. I think that's got to be the most of any support in any region this year. An absolutely phenomenal year for Ming, and I'm really hoping that he can continue this great run of form that he's had. Obviously a veteran of the world stage. I'm hoping that he can raise RNG above where I'm predicting them in my power rankings because I really do like his play that much. Moving on to number 7 on the list. Now we really start to get into some of the players that I think are unbelievable. That did kind of start with Yagao and Ming, who I do think are phenomenal, like genuinely like top of the world class players, but now we're talking about some of the players who are just the best, like the SSS plus tier players in the world from 7 and up, and that's going to start with my number 2 AD carry at the tournament, and my number 7 player overall. I have Viper from EDG coming in here. Anybody who follows the channel will know that I'm significantly high on Viper. I think he is the best AD carry in the LPL. I've thought that all year long. Even when people were on this Photic hype train or when people were on the Gala hype train, I think Viper has consistently proven over the course of his career that he is one of, if not the best AD carry in the world, and he takes my crown as the best AD carry in the LPL. So why do I think that? What exactly does Viper do that the others don't? Well, the thing about Viper that I think really puts him above everybody else, especially players like Jackie Love or Photic or people in that conversation, at least in the LPL, is there is no AD carry that I think is more consistently phenomenal in the world than Viper. I think you could even count Ruler, who will be on this list, into that. Viper just simply does not have bad games. He doesn't. He doesn't run it. He doesn't miss position. Sometimes he's not like super dominant, but I always called him, and this is going to be a huge compliment, and I really do believe this, a souped up version of Deft, where I think Deft always has these moments where he's very good. He's not really able to take over games, but he will never ever be the reason that you lose it. I think Viper is a souped up version of that, in which I don't think Viper will really ever be the reason you lose a series or a best of 5, but he will be the reason that you win it a lot of the time, and I think he showed that in playoffs, and he showed it again in the best of 5 against RNG in the regional finals, where he was just phenomenal in both of those series. He absolutely was able to clap RNG twice, clapped Gala in those matchups both times, and then moved on to be he crushed LNG, crushed Light, who I had as my number 2 my number 2 AD carry in the LPL in terms of all-pro voting. Absolutely crushed him to get to that 3rd place game, and while he wasn't perfect against TES, he was still pretty darn good overall. And so Viper definitely deserves his place in the top 7, in my opinion. I think this meta suits him very well. In my opinion, Aphelios is probably going to be the top AD carry pick coming out. If we do see late game focused champions, it's going to be Aphelios, it's going to be Jinx. Obviously, we know Viper's phenomenal on both of those champions. I really have no worry. If we go to a more early game aggressive style, with the Misfortune, with the Caitlyn kind of being earlier prio picks, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him pick those up and really push the tempo bot lane. When EDG really started to find success, and I was saying this all year long in my LPL weekly reviews, EDG really started to find success when they brought in a jungler that was willing to play almost entirely around Viper, because they recognized that Viper was the best player on this EDG team, and I think he upheld that over the course of the year. So for me, pretty much a no-brainer to slot him in at number 7 here. He was my first choice for all-pro AD carries in the LPL, even on a team that was struggling, wasn't even top 4 for the entirety of the split. He got 5 Player of the Series for me, 14 Player of the Game awards. He was pretty much everything EDG had. Now, some people are going to be frustrated to not see other EDG players on this list. There is no Scout. There is no Mako, spoiler alert. But to me, this was Viper's team in 2022, and that's the reason why it's more difficult for me to include someone like Scout on this list, because I do think Scout did take a pretty big step back this year in terms of being able to play. It took him a while to really attach himself to the modern meta, and I do think he's playing a lot better now, but this has been Viper's team in 2022, and I think we're going to continue to see that at the World Championships. Obviously, he's in the big AD carry group, Group A here with Gumayushi, with Berserker, potentially Upset joining that group. A lot of phenomenal talent there in Group A for AD carries, but Viper rises to the top of that list, pretty much no question for me, and I really hope he can come out as a defending world champion, defending his crown, proving to everybody why I believe he's the #1 AD carry in the LPL and one of the best AD carries in the world. Jumping into number 6 on my ranking list now, and this is one that I think is a little bit controversial, and I'm astounded as to why. I really don't get it. A lot of people have been putting this player at much, much lower numbers, and honestly, I feel like I'm going crazy because it's not that he's unknown, or I think people just forgot or just assumed that the problems in summer were his fault, but coming in at number 6 for me, and as the number 3 mid laner in the tournament for me, I have Xiaohu from RNG. I've been pretty constantly seeing him out of the top 10 in a lot of top 20 lists, and I just don't understand that. Like, it's really hard for me to understand why, because it's not like Xiaohu's some hidden name. It's not like you're looking through and people are just overlooking him because he had one good year or whatever. No, he's been the best player on RNG all year long, including summer, and I get it. Like, RNG suffered in summer in terms of, like, production and wasn't nearly to the same level that they wanted to be, but I don't know how you can blame, I don't know how you can watch those games and blame that on Xiaohu. I thought he was phenomenal throughout a majority of the summer split, and he continued to be phenomenal in playoffs. The rest of the team just wasn't picking up the weight. He had his bot lane losing in both of the series against EDG, and he couldn't really do anything about that. His top side was a little bit irrelevant in the playoffs as well. Breathe had some good games, but certainly wasn't there in the losses. Wei got out jungled by JJ in both of the series that they lost. It's really hard for me to sit here and be like, Xiaohu was the reason they lost any of those series, and so for me, he pretty easily comes in here at number 6. He was number 2 in my LPL MVP voting, and it almost feels like he got lost in the shuffle somehow throughout the year. He was essentially perfect at this meta in the way that he could be, where we had a Talia, Ahri, Lissandra, Sylas-oriented meta, where typically, and I talked about this with Yagao, you're not going to be able to be that big hyper carry in the mid lane, but RNG still wanted to invest a lot into that role, so they would draft the Ahri and they would draft the Talia, and instead of just shoving and leaving lane, they would invest resources into that lane. They would get the Talia super far ahead so that those Seismic Shove plus Q plus the W, like, it was doing 1 billion damage, and he could genuinely just take over games on these champions that aren't specifically known for taking over games. Obviously, Xiaohu is still the player that I would say has the most pressure on RNG. We can talk about Gala being incredibly talented, but watching the games, they just don't invest a lot into him in terms of attention. I talked about it with Ming. He's often leaving the bot lane to go mid and create plays, or to create plays with the jungle. Xiaohu is often the recipient of all of those things, and he really makes phenomenal use of it. And this is the big reason why I think RNG can upset my number 7 ranking, is because I do think Xiaohu is a world-class player. Obviously, the narrative surrounding Xiaohu might be a big reason that he's fallen, because RNG definitely dipped in quality in the summer split after dominating spring, going to MSI, winning it all, and barely being able to make it to Worlds here. A lot of people assume spring Xiaohu turned into summer Xiaohu, because that's been the narrative for his career over the past few years, but I really just don't see how watching the games can give you that impression. To me, he was very much still the best player on RNG and proved to be one of the best players in the world. He is the reason, in my opinion, this team is going to the World Championships. I think a great example of what this team could look like if Xiaohu was the player a lot of people are thinking that he is Victory 5. And no offense to Rookie, I think Rookie is really, really good, but I think Xiaohu is essentially just a better version of Rookie in 2022, where he's a more passive-minded player, but he's willing to take those resources, and he's willing to carry if he needs to, which he did here, and he was getting his team across the finish line. He was able to beat LNG, whereas Victory 5 was not able to do that, and I think that really is the difference. I think Xiaohu deserves to be in this top 6. A lot of people are going to have him lower. A lot of people are going to be mad that I have Xiaohu over Yagao. A lot of people are going to be mad that I have Xiaohu over Tian, especially, but for me, this feels just about right for where I would put Xiaohu in terms of the overall player rankings. I think he is one of the best players in the world, but he just does not manage to crack my top 5 because I truly do believe the top 5 are generational level talents that we're going to be talking about for a long, long, long time. So Xiaohu, phenomenal player, 12 Player of the Game awards, 5 Player of the Series awards. Very, very good in the specific meta. He's going to be dominant at Worlds. He's going to absolutely smurf plans. It's going to be very fun to watch, but very, very, very narrowly just not making my top 5. Moving on now to my top 5. This is where it really starts to get interesting. These are my top 5 players at Worlds in 2022, and this is where the opinions are really going to start getting out of control. Obviously, everything in this video is super opinion-oriented, but top 5 is definitely going to be the most controversial because it is the most scrutinized. So let's go ahead and get into who I believe to be the top 5 players at this tournament. We're going to be kicking it off with the number 5 player and the number 2 jungler at this tournament, in my opinion, and that is going to be Kanavi from JD Gaming. He comes in here at number 5 for me, and I think this is right around where he probably is in the world rankings as well. He's probably around the 5th best player in the world right now, and that should show you how good of a year JDG and Kanavi just generally had as a whole. The number 1 team coming out of the LPL and the number 1 player on that team. Kanavi coming in here at number 5 has been genuinely phenomenal this year. Obviously, we were talking about Kanavi a couple of years ago as one of the best junglers in the world. He had a much lower 2021 than anyone expected, me included. I thought this team was going to continue to be one of the best teams in the world, but Zoom really fell off a cliff in the top lane, and it really felt like Kanavi fell off a cliff in the jungle as well throughout 2021. 2022 happens. You bring 369 in to play top lane. You have a bunch of mess going on in the bot lane, but you land on Hope. You get missing. You have Yagao still there. Everything just seemed to click for Kanavi this year, and he was that game-breaking takeover threat that he was in 2020, again here in 2022, making him one of the best players in the world once again. He is just phenomenal at every facet of playing jungle in this meta. Not only is he incredibly aggressive early, he knows how to dictate the tempo. We're seeing a lot of Viego, a lot of Lee Sin, Xin Zhao. Obviously, these were the common picks for most junglers over the course of the year, but he just simply played them better than anybody else. But when we got to that summer meta where it was a lot more, you know, push the early game lead and try to transition that into lane dominance, things like the Wukong, things like the Trundle, he was picking those things up and playing them better than anybody else as well. And so I'm very comfortable with Kanavi as probably the most versatile or one of the most versatile junglers in the game right now. And I think that's a big asset going into an international tournament where nobody really knows what the meta is going to exactly be. And if you can kind of nail down a bunch of different styles, if you can be more flexible in draft, not as targetable, that's going to be great. Not to mention the fact that when he does play aggressive on any of these champions, he does so in a way that generates him a lead for the rest of the game. We see a lot of junglers at a lower level, you know, not calling out the LCS and the LEC, but we see a lot of junglers at the LCS and LEC level play really aggressive in order to generate leads for themselves, whereas one of the top players in the world like Kanavi will generate a lead with his aggression in the early game for everybody. He will take whatever map advantage that he has and make sure that top lane is able to push forward on it. Make sure that mid lane is able to push forward on it. Make sure that his lanes are able to capitalize just as heavily off of that advantage as he is, and it gets the game snowballing so far out of control so quickly that teams have a very difficult time of actually beating JDG in the mid game after Kanavi is able to generate that lead. A lot of their losses this year have simply just been early games that haven't gone perfect for JDG, and it's really hard to predict that that's not going to happen relatively consistently on the world stage as well, because Kanavi has consistently been able to generate leads against some of the best junglers in the world. And so I feel very confident about Kanavi coming in here as the number 5 player. He was first in All-Pro for my junglers. That's going to be a big trend for everybody coming up. I don't believe there's anybody that wasn't first in their position in All-Pro voting that's left on this list. 12 Player of the Game awards, only 4 Player of the Series awards, but that's because JDG had a lot of really good players. That was split amongst Yagao and 369, and so there were, you know, this is not an indicator of how good Kanavi is. There were a lot of good players on JDG this year, but overall, Kanavi is phenomenal. In my opinion, he's the number 2 jungler in the world. Really not that far off from being number 1, though. You could really make the argument that he is the best jungler in the world, and I think you can make the argument that he is the best carry jungler in the world, because the team really does focus through him more than I would say the one that's above him. But overall, Kanavi coming in at top 5 shouldn't be all that controversial. He is a phenomenal player that has proved game in and game out over the course of the year that he deserves to be at this spot. Moving on now to number 4 in my top 20 rankings here, and coming in at number 4, we're going to see a big stretch of a few players that I'm sure a lot of people have been waiting for me to talk about. And coming in at number 4 is my number 1 jungler, coming right after my number 2, and that is Peanut from Gen G. What can I say about Peanut that I haven't said throughout the majority of this year already? He is the best jungler in the world, in my opinion, right now. There is just simply no one who is able to take over the game and change the meta, quite frankly, nearly as much as Peanut is able to. He was first to the game with the Poppy in spring. He was bringing it out and absolutely destroying people on it. So much so that the entire meta eventually revolved around that Poppy pick, not only in the LCK, but in every region in the world. And then he did the same thing with Wukong. He brought Wukong in, was really starting to play Wukong before a lot of other people were picking up on it. Everybody else realizes, oh yeah, this pick's really good, and they start going to it too. He just has a knack for finding things in this meta that are game-breaking. He has found the 2 best junglers over the course of the year, essentially first, and he's also performed better than anybody else on those picks. The Poppy has been perma-banned against him, the Wukong very, very close as a second. Still a very, very good player on everything else, on the Trundle, on the Lee Sin, whatever you really want to pick up, the Xin Zhao, whatever you want to pick up. For Peanut, he does it well because he is versatile and he is probably the most all-around jungler I could possibly think of. Early in his career, I think he was much more well-known as a carry-oriented jungler. He's very much settled into this role on Gen G and obviously on Nongshim last year as well as the perfect supportive jungler. My grade of him, or the way I've always talked about him, and this is, you know, maybe not the best, some people are going to be mad about this comparison, but I think he's just a better version of what Tian offers TES. I think Peanut is actually unbeatable if he's playing his game where he can control the map. He's always going to be in a position to be able to win the fight that he puts himself in. Kind of more akin to the old style of Korean play where it would be, you know, heavy decision-making, low action. I think Peanut definitely takes up on that, but the action that he generates is almost always incredibly successful. He very rarely takes plays that he loses, and therefore very rarely loses a jungle matchup. He is so pinpoint perfect at punishing mistakes on the enemy team that by 7 minutes every single game, he's gonna be up in gold. For one reason or another, he's either going to have found a lane that is perfectly gankable because the laner has just stepped up a tad bit too far. He's going to have out-jungled you with macro and have an extra camp or have been able to double crab you or whatever, right? Have wards around the dragon pit so he's able to secure the first objective very easily. Whatever you need to do. Or he's just simply going to catch you out when you're trying to get vision yourself. He's always putting himself in the perfect position to be able to take advantage of his opponent's mistakes, and I don't think any other jungler in the world has the same kind of repertoire that Peanut has. He is so ridiculously consistent. He is so ridiculously dominant. I really don't know how you play against him. You can't ban him out. You can't outplay him in the early game. You really can't outplay him in the mid game either, and by the late game, he's so far ahead that it doesn't even really matter. I just don't know what Peanut's weakness is. He dominated, and I mean dominated the LCK finals against T1. It was not even close. Owner is on this list as a top 20 player at Worlds, and he stood absolutely no chance going into Peanut in that finals. It was actually unbelievable to watch. And so overall, Peanut for me does come in as the number 1 jungler, the number 4 player overall. I think there is an argument to be made that he could be even higher on this list, but for me, he's surrounded by a ton of really good talent. It does make his job a bit easier, but at multiple points this year, it really felt like Peanut was the star of this Gen G team. He came in 3rd in my MVP voting in the LCK, only behind another player that we're going to see on this list. And then Prince, who just didn't make this tournament because Live Sandbox collapsed at the end of the year, but Peanut was so phenomenal over the course of the year, someone who was changing the game and quite literally just could not be stopped at multiple points. He'll obviously be facing better competition, maybe not in the group stage. I mean, RNG will probably be in their group, but Hunter T, Flying Oyster, probably not putting up the kind of resistance that you're going to need to stop Peanut. But we're going to be seeing him finally tested against the best teams in the world over and over again once we get to knockout stage. And that's going to be an absolute blast to watch, and I, for one, cannot wait for it. If he ends this tournament as the finals MVP when Gen G wins it, I'm not going to be all that surprised at all. But overall, Peanut definitely deserving of this top 5 ranking, in my opinion, and realistically, I think you could put him even higher than number 4. But he does end at number 4 for me because The top 3 are just legitimately unbelievable. Now we're really getting into it as we jump into the top 3 for me at the World Championships this year. And you should probably already be able to tell who the top 3 players are. You're probably just wondering what order they're going to be in. And it's probably going to be a little bit of a controversial, surprising order here, because coming in at number 3 in my Worlds rankings and the number 180 carry, I have the MVP of the LCK, Ruler from Gen G. Real case to be made that he's number 1. I think there's a real case to be made that all 3 of the rest of the people here are number 1, and I really wouldn't, be mad at you at all, but Ruler for me comes in at number 3. He's the best AD carry in the world right now. I don't even think that's really all that up for debate. I know I'm in love with Viper, and I think he's awesome, but even I don't think I can put him above Ruler, who is just playing the best League of Legends of his historic career this year, which is absolutely insane to say. Ruler is so unbelievable because not only can I sit here and expect him to perform as well in the regular season because he's been an LCK staple and probably the best AD carry in the LCK for 4-ish years now. I mean, a good long while, maybe even longer than that, depending on how good you think Ruler has been over the course of his career. But this is someone who has proven on the international and world stage in the past that he does step up big when it matters the most. This is someone who did win the 2017 World Championships, and you have to remember what that meta was. That was the Ardent Sensor meta. That was the meta where it was really just which bot lane is better, which bot lane is going to win, and Ruler proved at that tournament that he was arguably the best bot laner in the world, and that was 5 years ago, and he's still the best bot laner in the world. I have no qualms with Ruler. He plays essentially perfect. We talked about how Viper doesn't really make any mistakes. Well, Ruler does make mistakes sometimes, but he almost always makes up for it by just being dominant. His laning phase is one of the most impressive that I've watched all year long, especially paired up with Lehens. Those two create so many advantages essentially by themselves in the bottom lane. We talked about how Peanut was able to generate so much in the jungle. Well, Ruler essentially 2v2 in the bottom lane has been able to outbeat everybody in the LCK, a region where I think the bot lane talent in particular is some of the highest it's been in a very, very long time. And that should just show you how good he is. But even outside of that, the MVP of the most historic region in League of Legends, even if people do think, and probably rightfully so, that the LPL has surpassed it in terms of quality, being the MVP and the runaway, in my opinion, MVP of the LCK over the course of this year was an outstanding feat for a legendary career. Like I said before in my LCK video, I truly do believe that Ruler is the greatest AD carry of all time. I understand that if you want to put up against, if you want to put Uzi in there, I'm not going to be mad at you even remotely at all. I think they're incredibly close. And honestly, once you get to that point, once you're on the level of Ruler or Uzi, it really is just personal preference anyways, because really, it's not like you're losing by picking either of them. And so, just for me, watching Ruler every single game like I've been able to do over the past 5 years, it just feels unbelievable to me that he is a professional player because he is essentially the perfect ADC. Like I said, dominates the 2v2, is probably the best team fighter in the world, and it really isn't all that close. His mid game is dominant, especially on that Lucian Nami we saw multiple times this year, but if you want to pick up the Jinx or the Aphelios, play for late game, do that. He's going to position super well, and he's going to dominate those team fights and win the game for you. If you want to pick the Misfortune and Caitlyn and dominate the lane, he's going to absolutely slaughter whoever he's playing into because he's mechanically that good. There's just nothing that he can do wrong. 14 Player of the Game awards, 7 Player of the Series awards. You have to remember, they only played in 18 series over the course of the year. It's not like there were a lot. He got 7 of them, and that is absurd. Like, that's a genuine absurd amount. There's really not a lot of players in the world that could even remotely touch that number in terms of my perception of him. He just had an unreal level of a year, and I fully expect him to be able to duplicate that on the world stage. Now that's going to bring us to our top 2 players at the World Championships in 2022. Both of them are mid laners, so that's pretty cool. Overall, obviously revealing number 2 is going to reveal number 1, and this is where I imagine I'm going to get most of the flame for this video, and so I'm very prepared to be answering a ton of comments throughout this entire cycle and to be answering some of those dislikes, but coming in at number 2 in my top 20 players list at Worlds 2022 is going to be Chovy from Gen G. First of all, 3 Gen G players in a row, 4, 3, 2. Maybe there's a reason why I have them number 1 in my power rankings. My opinion, this team is just utterly loaded with talent. Peanut, Ruler, Chovy is the best trio of players in the world. No team can even remotely touch that, and I know a lot of other people are significantly higher on Lehens and Doran than I am, and if you think all 5 of them are top 20, then congrats. Like, that's why I think they're the best team in the world. But Chovy coming in here at number 2, I mean, what can I say about Chovy that a lot of people just don't already say? He's the best laner in the world, and it's not even particularly close. There really aren't a lot of people out there that can go toe-to-toe with Chovy and live to tell the tale. Like, he's going to be up 40, 50 CS on you no matter what mid-game. And compounding that, he has recently in summer shown that he has completely unlocked that part of his playstyle that we were all just a little bit worried wasn't there for Chovy, which is the secondary carry supportive playstyle. We all knew that he could go out and dominate lane and be a big carry and get resources and carry the game on it and be one of the flashiest players in the world. We knew he could be that, but we didn't know if he could be a secondary piece on a super team like this Gen G team was, but boy, did he prove us wrong in Summer Split, as he was picking up a ton of the Ahri, a ton of the Talia, a ton of the Sylas, and he wasn't getting a lot of ganks. He was shoving and roaming and playing around his jungler and being more of a team supportive player, and now that that part of his game is there, he's the best mid laner in the world. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's the best player in the world quality. Like, that was the only thing that he was missing over the course of his career. He had always been, in my opinion, one of the most, if not the most dominant carry players in the world. And he unlocked this part of the game where now you don't even need to give him resources for him to be hyper effective in pretty much any game that he is in. So yeah, I basically hit that point with Chovy where it's like, yeah, he's 1A, 1B with my number 1 player in the world. If you want to put Chovy number 1, I certainly won't doubt you. He only had 4 player of the series for me, but I think that understates how much of a revelation it was that he was the secondary piece on this Gen G team the whole year, because if they were investing in him like they did with Ruler and like they did with Peanut, he would have had 75 million player of the series awards. We know that he can do that, but to show that he also can be this successful, not doing that on a team where there are abundant levels of carry, if Chovy's your 3rd piece, like, how freaking good does that make your team, and how versatile does that make your draft? And that's really what Chovy, I think, has unlocked for Gen G over the course of the year. So yeah, he comes in as my number 2 player, but honestly, he comes in as 1B. If you wanted him at 1A or 1 in general, like, I'm certainly not going to fight you on it. He is a player in terms of a League of Legends pro. There is nothing that he doesn't do that you, like, oh, sometimes he plays a little too aggressive. Well, that's really good in this meta because he often catches out a lot of his opponents in pick scenarios. Oh, well, sometimes he focuses too hard on lane. Well, he really didn't over the course of Summer Split. That was his problem, and he really shored that up. He was much more macro-focused, and that's really what unlocked Gen G to being overwhelmingly the best team in the LCK. I really can't think of a single weakness in Chovy's game at this point, and that's the reason he comes in at number 2. Overall, I don't know what to say. I'm a part of the Church of Chovy now. I was someone who was kind of hesitant to be on that train for a very long time. I've always been high on Chovy, but I've been very hesitant to call him the best player in the world because it always felt like he was one play style locked. It just doesn't feel like he has any flaws anymore, and I feel very, very, very confident putting him at number 2 on this list. Now, that is finally going to bring us to our number 1 player on this list, and it's by far the most controversial take I have. It's really not even all that close. I don't really understand why it's so controversial, but especially viewing everybody else's top 20 list, it's not something that I think lines up with a lot of other opinions out there. But coming in number 1 on my list, and is the number 1 mid laner in the world, I have Knight from Top Esports. I just don't understand what people don't like about Knight's game. Like, I really just don't, I don't get it. I don't understand what he doesn't do that other people do. Like, I see Yagao above Knight on a lot of lists, and I don't understand what Yagao does that Knight doesn't do better. And I don't mean that as a slight against Yagao. He's a top 10 player at this tournament for me, but I just, like, I don't get why people are so low on him. I've been seeing 12, I've been seeing 10, I've been seeing, like, I don't know. He's number 1 for me. In my opinion, he was the MVP of the LPL over the course of the regular season. To me, it never even felt all that debatable. He was the dominant force on Top Esports. This is what I was talking about in the Tian section, where I thought Tian was phenomenal and was able to enable a lot of what the rest of the team wanted to do, but at the end of the day, it was Knight that was carrying the team in the mid to late game team fights, that was allowing them to win a lot of the close games that they were able to win by facilitating not only his own lane, but Tian so much. I really felt like watching those games throughout the year, Knight felt like the focal player of top esports. It didn't feel like Tian, and that's why it confused me so much to see Tian so heavily praised after the split, when I just didn't have that same perception of him. I know a lot of people agree with me on that. Some don't, though, and it's definitely something worth pointing out. I had Knight as my MVP. He got 8, count 'em, 8 Player of the Series awards from me. Do you know that they played 16 regular season series in the LPL? That he got literally half of his team's Player of the Series awards, not in their wins, in their series in general, 50%? That's the kind of player that I think Knight is. I think he is genuinely unstoppable when playing at his absolute best, and I thought we saw that very consistently throughout the LPL this year. Well, I know what a lot of the comments are going to be. Knight didn't have the same kind of playoffs that he had as the regular season, and Knight historically hasn't been the same kind of player in playoffs. First of all, I disagree with this argument. I think Knight had 1 or 2 games in the playoffs where he didn't play up to standard, but you know what? So did Tian, and you know what? So did everybody else in the LPL, because playoffs were an absolute bloodbath. You can't tell me that Kanavi wasn't out-jungled 1 or 2 games in the playoffs. I covered all of them on the channel. You can go check them out. I don't understand this narrative that Knight's weaknesses in playoffs are gigantic, whereas everybody else's are small. LPL playoffs are a complete bloodbath, and you're not going to be perfect every game, but for the most part, Knight was still phenomenal throughout the playoffs, especially when it mattered the most. That third place series, that losers finals against EDG, he obliterated Scout in the final few games to push them over into the finals. The first 2 games against JDG in winners finals when they lost, Knight was genuinely terrific. He was a big reason they were in that situation to begin with. Yes, Jackie Love was also great, but you have to give a lot of credit to Knight in those situations as well for not only being able to dominate his individual lane, but dominating his lane while also shoving and roaming. He got the best of both worlds. There's no mid laner in the world that was consistently able to do that to that same level. Like I said, I think Chovy is the only one who came relatively close, but even then, I think Chovy was mostly fine going even in lane to cause huge problems with macro, at least in the summer split. Knight didn't have to make that concession. He was gonna be up 20 CS and also shoving and also first to the objective fights. And there just isn't another player in the world that had that same kind of impact. So for me, Knight very clearly comes in as the #1 player at this tournament. I'm going to get a ton of comments. I'm happy to chat it up with you guys in the comment section below why I feel that way, but I feel like Knight is completely meta-proof, and I think he is, like, player-proof. He's going to do the same thing against anybody in the world, whether he's playing Chovy or whether he's playing freaking Kati in the group stage. Like, it doesn't matter. He's going to dominate everybody in the same way because that's what he's done all year in the LPL, so I expect Knight to really show up at this World Championship. I expect him to be one of the players that we're talking about the most, especially in group stage and throughout the knockout stage. I really hope that this is the year that Knight proves to everybody that he is one of the best players in the world, without a doubt, and can finally be one of the players that is in the finals, hoisting up that trophy that has eluded him over the course of his career. Alright, but that is going to do it for my top 20 players at Worlds in 2022 list. Video, everything, part 1, part 2, both completed. I appreciate it if you stuck along for the ride. I know there's probably a lot of opinions in this video that you disagree with, and that's great. That's the reason that we all watch the games, is because we're all going to have slightly different opinions. My top 20 list is not going to look exactly like your top 20 list, so let me know what yours is down in the comment section below. And of course, while you're down there, if you did enjoy the video, if you enjoy a lot of the content that I've been able to produce on this World's preview ride, leave a like. It really does mean a lot for the channel. It really helps me know that you guys are enjoying the content. And that's going to do it for my Worlds preview content before the World Championships begins, because tomorrow is the start of the World Championship. So get excited and hit that subscribe button, because we're going to have Worlds daily coverage coming out every single day on every single game that's played at the World Championships, and I hope you guys are excited for that, because I am super stoked to be getting that out to you guys. And of course, if you don't want to miss any of that, hit subscribe, hit the bell so you can be notified when those videos go live. But With all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.